Elon Musk stepped out of his black Tesla Model S, the sleek, futuristic car silently purring to a stop as he adjusted his jacket and made his way to the door of the upscale restaurant. The evening air was cool and crisp, a subtle breeze sweeping through the city as he approached one of the most talked-about eateries in downtown Los Angeles. He had been there before, always greeted by polite staff, treated like the celebrity entrepreneur he was. Tonight, however, something felt different. The glowing neon lights of the restaurant buzzed softly, and the smell of fresh cuisine wafted through the air, teasing his senses. He'd been working non-stop for days, and this dinner was supposed to be a much-needed break. The restaurant had been a favorite of his for years, a place where he could go without the weight of a dozen cameras or constant media questions. He had hoped for a quiet meal, just a chance to relax, to forget about the ever-expanding world of Tesla, SpaceX, and the constant barrage of public scrutiny. As Elon stepped inside, the host, a young woman dressed in a perfectly pressed black uniform, smiled at him. She seemed professional, poised, but her eyes were momentarily wide with recognition. Elon had grown used to this reaction over the years. It wasn't uncommon for people to stare or even ask for a photo when they recognized him. But this time was different. "Good evening, sir. I'm afraid we have a new policy," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. Elon raised an eyebrow, momentarily caught off guard. A new policy? He glanced around the restaurant, noting the bustling activity, the chatter of guests enjoying their meals, the clinking of silverware. Everything seemed normal, except for the sudden tension in the air. "Yes, sir. Unfortunately, we cannot serve you tonight," the host replied, her tone polite but firm. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, impossible to ignore. Elon took a step back, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "I'm sorry, what?" he asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. The host's eyes flickered nervously, glancing over her shoulder as if looking for guidance. "It's a new policy. It's company-wide. No exceptions. I'm afraid I cannot seat you." Elon's mind raced. He had been in hundreds of restaurants across the globe, from the finest dining establishments to the most modest eateries. He had never once been denied service, especially not because of a vague policy. Was this some sort of mistake? A misunderstanding? Or worse, had the restaurant decided to make an example out of him for some unknown reason? "Are you telling me that because of some policy, I can't eat here?" he asked, his voice growing more intense. "I'm sorry, sir. It's just that, well, it's against the policy," she said, clearly uncomfortable but resolute. Elon felt his jaw tighten. He could feel the eyes of the other patrons on him, the whispers beginning to spread. He tried to maintain his composure, but there was a rising sense of frustration inside him. This wasn't just a personal inconvenience, it was a challenge to everything he had worked for, everything he stood for. He had spent years building companies, promoting sustainable energy, revolutionizing the space industry, and here he was, being turned away from a restaurant. For a moment, Elon stood there, stunned, as the reality of the situation set in. The host didn't seem to know how to proceed, and the restaurant staff, once bustling with activity, had now stopped in their tracks, watching the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Is there someone I can speak to about this?" Elon asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The host hesitated but nodded, quickly disappearing behind a set of velvet curtains to presumably find a manager. Elon stood still, fuming internally. His mind began to swirl with questions. What kind of policy was this? What did it mean? And why had he, of all people, been singled out? Within minutes, the restaurant manager appeared, a middle-aged man dressed in a crisp white shirt and black apron. His demeanor was calm, even courteous, but there was something about his approach that felt rehearsed, as though he had been anticipating this very confrontation. "Mr. Musk," the manager said, extending his hand, which Elon shook reluctantly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, though I regret the circumstances. I'm afraid we have a strict new policy in place that prohibits us from serving certain guests. Elon raised an eyebrow again, his patience wearing thin. And you're telling me I'm one of those guests? The manager nodded, his eyes apologetic but firm. Yes, sir. It's a policy that was put in place for, well, I'm sure you can understand. We've had some issues with certain individuals, and in light of recent events, we've had to take steps to ensure that all our customers feel comfortable. Elon was stunned. Comfortable? I'm being turned away, and you're telling me it's for their comfort. His voice was sharp now, the frustration unmistakable. This is about me, isn't it? The manager hesitated, then spoke more cautiously. It's not personal, Mr. Musk. It's a matter of maintaining a certain atmosphere in the restaurant. We've made these decisions as part of our new direction. It's a company-wide decision, and unfortunately, we can't make exceptions. Elon stood there for a long moment, processing what had just transpired. His thoughts raced. This wasn't just about dinner. This was a statement, an action that seemed designed to undermine his authority and, perhaps, his very influence. You're telling me I'm not welcome here because of some policy that doesn't even make sense? Elon repeated, his voice barely a whisper now, but every word packed with intensity. The manager's face remained apologetic. I truly regret the inconvenience, Mr. Musk. But the decision has been made. With a quiet, almost imperceptible nod, Elon turned on his heel and walked toward the door. As he exited the restaurant, the whispers of the crowd followed him. His mind was in turmoil. How could this happen? What did it mean for the future of his relationships with the businesses that had supported him for years? As Elon climbed back into his Tesla, he slammed the door shut, the noise echoing in the otherwise quiet car. His pulse raced. This wasn't just a bad night out. This was something much bigger. Something that would change everything. He didn't know it yet, but this small incident would set the stage for a movement. The world would soon know exactly what Elon Musk was willing to do to protect his beliefs, and just how far he would go to make his voice heard. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The name Elon Musk had become synonymous with innovation, disruption, and ambition. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Musk had always been a bit of an outsider, someone who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. From a young age, he had demonstrated an insatiable curiosity, devouring books about everything from science fiction to physics. His mind was always racing, always searching for the next big idea. He wasn't always the billionaire entrepreneur we know today. In fact, his early life was filled with challenges that would have deterred most people. Musk's parents divorced when he was young, and he often felt like an outsider. He was bullied in school, and his awkwardness only added to his sense of alienation. Yet, this very isolation would later fuel his hunger for success. He threw himself into books and computers, becoming a self-taught programmer by the age of 12. In his 20s, Elon made the move to the United States, where he attended the University of Pennsylvania and later Stanford. But after just 2 days at Stanford, he dropped out to pursue his dreams of building something bigger. He co-founded Zip2, an online software company, which was eventually sold for nearly $300 million. Then came X.com, which evolved into PayPal, eventually sold to eBay for $1.5 billion. But it wasn't the world of online payments that truly ignited Musk's passion, it was space. With the launch of SpaceX in 2002, Musk had a clear vision, to make space travel affordable and sustainable. He wanted to make humanity a multiplanetary species. With SpaceX, he began an arduous journey, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible in space exploration. But, of course, that was just one piece of his empire. Tesla Motors came next, founded in 2003, and Musk didn't just want to build electric cars, he wanted to revolutionize transportation. He wanted to change the way people thought about energy, about the planet, about the future. Under his leadership, Tesla went from a fledgling company struggling to make a name for itself to one of the most valuable car manufacturers in the world. But Tesla's success didn't come without its own set of challenges. There were moments when it seemed as if the company might fail. Musk's critics were vocal, questioning his leadership and vision. But he pressed on, pouring his own money into Tesla when things looked bleak. His persistence paid off, and today, Tesla is a global leader in electric vehicles. In addition to his ventures with Tesla and SpaceX, Musk is also behind Neuralink, which aims to merge the human brain with artificial intelligence, and The Boring Company, a tunnel construction and infrastructure firm. He's also been a vocal advocate for sustainable energy and has worked tirelessly to make solar power more accessible to the masses through SolarCity, a company that was later acquired by Tesla. But Elon Musk is not just a businessman. He's a polarizing figure. To some, he is a genius, a visionary who's changing the world. To others, he is arrogant, erratic, and prone to controversy. His social media presence, particularly on Twitter, has only added to the complexity of his public image. He's known for sharing his unfiltered thoughts, which has led to both moments of brilliance and social media firestorms. From joking about sending a Tesla into space to his Twitter feud with Jeff Bezos, Musk has built a reputation for being unpredictable and unapologetically bold. And yet, despite his fame and fortune, Musk often seemed to carry a deep sense of loneliness. His success had come at a price, personal relationships had faltered, and he had struggled with the demands of being constantly in the public eye. His multiple divorces and strained relationships with close friends painted a picture of a man who, while brilliant, often seemed to operate in isolation. One of Musk's closest confidants had always been his brother, Kimball Musk, who had followed him to America and worked alongside him in various ventures. Kimball had been a grounding force for Elon, someone who could provide perspective when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. But even their relationship had been tested by Elon's intense focus on his work. Musk had sacrificed a great deal in pursuit of his dreams, and sometimes, even the closest relationships could fracture under the strain. In the public eye, Musk was the quintessential entrepreneur, driven, relentless, and unwavering in his belief that he could change the world. But behind the scenes, there were moments of doubt, of questioning whether it was all worth it. Was he truly making a difference, or was he just another billionaire who had managed to build an empire at the cost of everything else? And what did it mean for the future of humanity if he succeeded in his missions to colonize Mars, or revolutionize the transportation industry? Would these efforts ultimately serve the greater good, or would they simply create a world even more divided between the haves and the have-nots? Elon's journey had been defined by these questions. For all his achievements, there was still a sense that something was missing, a deeper connection, a purpose that transcended the millions in the bank and the companies he had built. He longed for validation, not just from investors or employees, but from something more human. And now, here he was, walking out of a restaurant that had denied him service because of some vague new policy. The experience stung more than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about being turned away, it was about what this incident represented. It felt like a rejection not just of him as a person, but of everything he stood for. As Elon drove back to his sprawling home, his mind raced. He wasn't just upset by the incident, it had awakened something inside of him. A desire to push back, to challenge the very system that had turned him away. The world had always been quick to judge him, to question his motives, but now, it seemed like he had had enough. If they were going to reject him, then maybe it was time to make them listen. The question was no longer about why he had been denied service, it was about what he was going to do next. The evening's events had left Elon in a state of restlessness. It wasn't like him to let something like a simple denial of service rattle him, but this time, it was different. There was an unsettling feeling that crept into his mind, a nagging thought that this wasn't just about one restaurant, one policy, or one incident. This was something larger, something that symbolized the friction between him and the world at large. In the days that followed, the story of his being denied service spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, and social media was ablaze with reactions, opinions, and debates. Some were sympathetic, expressing disbelief that someone like Musk, a man who had brought so much to the world in terms of innovation, could be treated this way. Others, however, seemed to relish the situation, using it as a means to criticize Musk and everything he represented. He had always been a lightning rod for public scrutiny, but this felt different. There was a palpable shift in the air, a sense that things were escalating, that the world wasn't quite as forgiving as it once was. Elon sat in his office late one night, scrolling through his Twitter feed. He could feel the pressure mounting. The headlines were harsh, the critiques were unrelenting. Even some of his own supporters seemed uncertain, wondering if he had done something to provoke this. He had always known that his unfiltered thoughts on Twitter could stir the pot, but this time, it wasn't his words causing the storm, it was his actions. The fact that he had been turned away in the first place had left people questioning the true nature of his power. Did Elon Musk truly stand for the values he claimed to? Or was he just another wealthy man with a bloated ego, out of touch with the struggles of everyday people? For the first time in a long time, Elon felt exposed. His privacy was shattered in an instant, his personal life laid bare for all to see. In an odd way, he felt like he was being tested. It was as though the world was saying, let's see how far you'll go. Let's see how much you're really willing to fight for what you believe in. He could feel the weight of that challenge pressing down on him. As the CEO of multiple companies, he had always been in the driver's seat. Whether it was building rockets, revolutionizing electric vehicles, or transforming the way we think about energy, Elon had always been the one in control. But this time, he wasn't in control. Someone, some restaurant, some nameless policy, had decided for him that he wasn't worthy of their service. And that wasn't something he was willing to accept. Elon's mind raced with possibilities. What was his next move? How could he turn this situation to his advantage? He had to do something. He had to fight back, not just for his own dignity, but for the very principles that he had always championed. This wasn't just about him. It was about the larger implications of a world that seemed to be more divided than ever before. A world where the powerful could be penalized for simply being who they were. A world where people could be pushed aside for no reason other than fear, envy, or misunderstanding. It was time for a change. And Elon knew that he was the one who had to make that change happen. The following day, he gathered his team for an emergency meeting at SpaceX headquarters. The usual atmosphere of optimism and excitement that filled the room seemed subdued, even tense. Elon could feel the shift in the air as he walked in. His employees were used to working on ambitious projects, solving complex problems, and tackling challenges that seemed insurmountable. But this wasn't like any challenge they had faced before. This was personal. This was about a man whose very identity was being questioned by a world that didn't seem to understand him. "I'm not going to let this go," Elon said, his voice calm but resolute. "This isn't just about a restaurant. This is about the culture we're living in right now, and how people like us, the ones who are trying to change the world, are constantly being sidelined, misunderstood, and judged." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "I'm not going to let the world tell me what I can and can't do. And I'm definitely not going to let anyone tell me who I can be. We've spent too long building companies, pushing boundaries, and changing the game. It's time we show the world what we stand for." There was a murmur of agreement in the room. Musk's employees, many of whom had followed him through the ups and downs of Tesla, SpaceX, and beyond, understood the stakes. They were accustomed to fighting against the odds, whether it was landing a rocket on a drone ship or producing electric cars at a scale no one thought was possible. But this was something different. This wasn't just about building products or technologies, it was about defending a way of life, a set of values that had always driven Elon forward. "We need to make a statement," Elon continued, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told they can't do something because they don't fit into someone else's idea of what's acceptable. We're going to fight back, and we're going to make sure the world knows exactly who we are. The room was silent for a moment, but then one of his senior engineers, Rachel, spoke up. Elon, how do you plan to make this happen? We can't just tweet about it and expect people to listen. Elon nodded. No, we're going to do more than that. We're going to hit the ground running. We'll make our own rules. We'll create our own space. And if we need to, we'll take this to the people. I want every person who's ever felt left out, pushed aside, or forgotten to know that they're not alone. The group began to brainstorm, fueled by Elon's energy. Ideas flew around the room as they discussed how they could turn this incident into a rallying cry, a movement, even. They could use their platforms to challenge outdated systems and bring attention to the way the world treated those who stood apart. It was time for a new kind of revolution, one that wasn't just about technology, but about reclaiming autonomy, dignity, and respect. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon left with a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just another corporate strategy, it was a fight for something bigger. It was a fight for the very soul of the future. As he walked out of the building, he felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just going to change the world with rockets and electric cars. He was going to change the way people thought about power, about influence, and about what it meant to be truly free. The battle had only just begun. Elon's resolve had solidified, and as he moved forward, he began to take the necessary steps toward making his statement loud and clear. What had started as a seemingly insignificant incident, a simple denial at a restaurant, had now transformed into a catalyst for something much larger. But how exactly was he going to respond? What was his next move? Elon had always been strategic, but this wasn't about the usual business strategy or tech venture. This wasn't about launching another product or building a new company, it was about using his platform and resources to create a movement that could change the way society viewed its most influential figures. It was about questioning the social norms and status quo that dictated who had power and who did not. And for Elon, there was no better way to fight back than by making a statement the world would not soon forget. He started with a tweet. From now on, I won't eat anywhere unless they agree to one thing: full transparency. I believe in the power of accountability, and I'm committed to making sure the world knows what's really going on behind closed doors. Restaurants should be places of openness, just like the companies we run. If you can't be transparent, then I won't be dining at your tables. The tweet went viral almost immediately. Within hours, media outlets, celebrities, business moguls, and even everyday people began sharing their thoughts. Some praised his boldness and willingness to challenge the system, while others criticized him for being out of touch, for using his influence in such a trivial way. But Elon was prepared for the mixed reactions. He knew that making waves would inevitably cause a stir. What mattered to him was that he was being heard. However, the response from the restaurant industry itself was something Elon hadn't anticipated. A growing number of restaurant owners and operators started to voice their disapproval. Some called it a stunt, others said he was overreacting, and a few went as far as to say that his demands were unreasonable. One of the biggest backlashes came from Jonathan Bellamy, a well-known celebrity chef and owner of the prestigious Bellamy's Grill chain, which had been widely regarded as one of the best fine dining experiences in the country. He was quick to take to Twitter, writing, "I have nothing but respect for Elon Musk's genius, but this is absurd. Transparency in restaurants? It's a place to eat, not a boardroom. This isn't how the real world works. The last thing we need is another billionaire telling us what's best for everyone." Elon didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down. He tweeted back, "Jonathan, it's about integrity. It's about honesty. If you're running a business, especially one that people trust, you need to be open about what you're serving, how it's being made, and who's behind it. If you don't like it, maybe it's time to rethink the future." The conflict had escalated. What began as a personal incident had now sparked a national debate about transparency, power, and the role of public figures in influencing society. It was no longer just about a single rejection at a restaurant, it was about the larger issue of control, elitism, and the expectation that certain people could do whatever they wanted without accountability. Elon's team at SpaceX, Tesla, and even Neuralink had all started to feel the ripple effects of the situation. Their work, their achievements, and their own identities were now linked to this narrative of defiance and change. But it wasn't just about their work, it was about the people they served and the customers who supported them. Even some of Musk's closest allies were beginning to ask questions. Rachel, one of his senior engineers at SpaceX, called him into her office late one afternoon to have a candid conversation. "Elon, I get what you're doing. I do. But this is bigger than just an online argument. This has the potential to harm our brand, to harm Tesla, SpaceX, everything. The restaurant incident was just a spark, but you're turning it into a wildfire. Are you sure this is the best path forward?" Elon sat down, his mind still racing with ideas. He could see where she was coming from. After all, every move he made now was being scrutinized. The public was watching, and the world's perception of him was on the line. But he couldn't turn back now. He was committed to the cause. This was more than just about food or customer service, it was about the future he wanted to shape. "I'm not going to apologize for standing up for what I believe in, Rachel. The world is full of people who are afraid to challenge the status quo, and I'm not one of them. It's time people understood that power, influence, and success should be about more than just profits and business, it should be about responsibility." Rachel nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. "I know you want to make a difference. And I respect that. Just, be careful. You've got a lot at stake here. And we all have a lot to lose." Elon appreciated her concern. But he wasn't afraid. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was the exact kind of challenge he had always thrived on. He was always willing to take risks, to push the boundaries of what was possible. This was no different. His plan was clear now, this wasn't just a personal crusade. It was the beginning of something larger, something that could have far-reaching consequences. Elon Musk wasn't just going to confront the restaurant industry. He was going to challenge the way the world operated. He would create an initiative, one that would gather public support and force change, not just in the restaurant world but in the broader culture of transparency and accountability. But the journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more conflict, more pushback, and more controversy. The road ahead was going to test his resolve in ways he hadn't imagined. But if there was one thing Elon Musk was used to, it was rising to meet a challenge head-on. And so, with his decision made, the next phase of the journey began. The world was watching, and Elon knew that now, more than ever, he had to be ready for what was to come. As the days passed, the story of Elon Musk's stance on transparency and accountability continued to make waves. News outlets were abuzz, and social media buzzed even more with heated debates. People from all walks of life were taking sides. Some were rallying behind him, admiring his willingness to use his influence for something beyond business ventures. Others saw his actions as an eccentric billionaire's latest publicity stunt. The restaurant industry, in particular, was divided. Some restaurateurs were on the defensive, while others saw an opportunity to leverage the controversy to their advantage. But amidst all this, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. It wasn't just the backlash from the media or the restaurant world, it was the sense that he was fighting a battle on multiple fronts, and the weight of it was starting to get to him. He had spent his life pushing the boundaries of technology, breaking through barriers, and proving people wrong. But this was different. This wasn't about engineering a new product, designing an innovative rocket, or making a groundbreaking electric car. This was about reshaping an entire culture. And that was a different kind of challenge altogether. At the core of it, Elon was questioning the very nature of power and privilege. He had been at the top of the technological world for so long, always looking ahead to the next big thing. But now, with the world looking to him for leadership on a social issue, he began to realize just how fragile the public's perception of him could be. His identity, his carefully curated image as a visionary entrepreneur, was now tangled with this ongoing controversy. And while he was driven by a sense of purpose, there were moments of doubt. It all came to a head one evening. Elon sat in his office, staring at the vast expanse of SpaceX's headquarters through the large glass windows. His mind was swirling with the constant barrage of messages, news articles, and tweets. Every time he thought he had a clear path forward, something else would pop up, challenging his resolve. The weight of the situation was starting to get to him. His phone buzzed on the desk in front of him. It was a text from Rachel. "Elon, we need to talk. It's about the public perception of the movement. People are starting to feel like this is less about transparency and more about a personal vendetta. I know this matters to you, but I think we need to rethink how you're approaching this." Elon's fingers hovered over his phone screen. Part of him wanted to ignore the message, to dismiss it as just another piece of noise in the cacophony of opinions. But deep down, he knew Rachel had a point. She was right. People were starting to see his fight as a personal vendetta, a way for him to get back at the world for not treating him the way he thought he deserved. He'd always considered himself an advocate for change, but now, he was starting to see the fine line between standing for something important and becoming a symbol of arrogance. The pressure was beginning to overwhelm him. He picked up the phone and called Rachel. "Hey, Rachel. I got your message," he said, his voice strained. "I'm starting to feel like maybe I've been going about this the wrong way." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Elon, I don't think you're wrong. But it's important that you keep your focus. The message about transparency, about changing the way businesses operate, is still a powerful one. But you can't let the noise drown it out. You're doing something important, but it's going to take more than a few tweets and bold statements. People need to see that you're in it for the right reasons." I don't know anymore," Elon confessed, the weight of the situation finally taking its toll. "The more I push, the more it feels like I'm pushing people away. I started this because I believed in it, but now it's like, everything is spiraling out of control." Rachel's voice softened, a rare moment of understanding in her tone. "Elon, I know this is hard. You've been a visionary for so long, but not every fight is going to be won in one tweet, or in one public showdown. Sometimes, the real change happens behind the scenes. You don't have to carry this burden alone. You've built an incredible team. Lean on them. We've got your back." His heart sank as he listened to her words. In many ways, Rachel had been right by his side through the most challenging moments of his career. He'd relied on her judgment more than anyone else in his company. She had always kept him grounded, but now, for the first time, he could feel the pressure of his choices pulling him in multiple directions. "I appreciate that, Rachel. Really, I do. But I don't know how much longer I can do this without feeling like I'm losing myself in the process." Rachel let out a long breath. "Maybe it's time to step back, take a moment to really think about what this all means. What are you fighting for, Elon? Is it about transparency, or is it about something deeper? I think you need to be clear about your why before you can keep going." Elon sat in silence for a long time after the call ended. He stared out at the dark sky, his mind heavy with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. He had always known that change came at a cost, but now, the cost seemed far greater than he had anticipated. As he sat there, alone with his thoughts, he realized something important. His crusade for transparency, for accountability, was not just about public relations or taking down the restaurant industry. It was about challenging an entire system, and that system wasn't just confined to restaurants. It extended to every corner of society, from the way businesses operated to the way power was wielded by the privileged few. What he had begun was about much more than himself. it was about transforming the very fabric of the world he lived in. But transformation, he now understood, was never easy. It wasn't about making headlines. It was about standing strong, even when the world questioned your every move. It was about staying true to your purpose, no matter how many people tried to pull you off course. And for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk found clarity amidst the chaos. The emotional journey he had begun wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The following days were quiet, almost unnervingly so. After the emotional conversation with Rachel, Elon had retreated into his work, focusing on what he did best, engineering solutions and leading innovation. But something had shifted within him. The weight of the controversy and the backlash was no longer a cloud hovering overhead, it had become a defining moment in his career. He had to decide if this fight was worth the price he might have to pay. Yet, despite his best efforts to refocus on his work, the story of his transparency movement continued to dominate headlines. The pressure from the media had only intensified, and more high-profile figures began commenting on his bold stance. The restaurant world, in particular, was not letting go of the controversy. Some chefs had even organized a rally, protesting what they saw as an unrealistic demand for transparency in the restaurant industry. But it wasn't just the restaurant world that was pushing back. A more insidious force was at play, one that Elon hadn't fully anticipated. The public itself, while initially intrigued by his challenge, was starting to lose interest. They had quickly grown tired of the spectacle. Elon Musk, once hailed as the savior of technology in space exploration, was now becoming a symbol of dissonance. The very people who had supported him for years, admired his work with SpaceX, and revered him for revolutionizing the electric car industry, were now questioning his motives. Elon sat at the dinner table one evening, his laptop open in front of him as he scrolled through the endless stream of comments. Negative feedback. Criticism. Doubt. It was almost too much to bear. He put the laptop down, rubbed his eyes, and leaned back in his chair. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just another billionaire trying to push my own agenda, even if it's for the right reasons, he thought, frustration gnawing at him. At that moment, his phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. A text message from Rachel popped up. I think it's time we meet. You've been avoiding the bigger question, what's next? If you want to change the world, you can't just be reactionary. You have to think strategically. Let's sit down and figure this out. Rachel's words hit hard. She was right, and he knew it. The doubts swirling in his mind were a distraction, he had allowed them to take over. If he was going to make this work, he needed to think more clearly, more strategically. And more than that, he needed to remember why he started this journey in the first place. The next day, Elon met Rachel at a cafe in downtown Palo Alto. They sat outside under the warm California sun, sipping coffee as they tried to hash out a new approach. I've been thinking a lot about your advice, Elon began, breaking the silence. Maybe I've been too focused on the spectacle. I started this because I want to change how people view power and influence. But I can't do that by just being angry at the system. I need to get back to what's important. Rachel nodded, her eyes focused on him. Exactly. The transparency thing, it's not about restaurants or food. It's about a larger shift in the way society operates. You can't let people see you as just a petulant billionaire. You have the power to shift the culture, but it has to come from a place of purpose, not emotion. Elon thought about this for a moment. Purpose, yeah, that's what's been missing. I was so focused on calling out everyone else that I forgot to explain why. People need to understand that this is bigger than me, it's bigger than the restaurant industry. Rachel smiled, finally seeing a spark in Elon that had been absent for days. Exactly. You need to show them what you're fighting for. And the key to doing that is making your vision clear. Transparency isn't just about revealing secrets, it's about creating a system where trust is the foundation of everything. You've got that power, Elon. People need to see it. Elon nodded, feeling a renewed sense of direction. The clarity he had been searching for had finally arrived. He wasn't just making a statement to prove a point. He was creating a movement. He was using his influence to start a dialogue about a new world, one built on accountability, integrity, and trust. The conversation turned to action. Elon knew that it wasn't enough to simply declare his intentions, he had to back it up with real, meaningful steps. He would need to engage with the public on a deeper level, explaining why this was important, and how transparency could change the world for the better. It wasn't going to be easy, but he had always thrived on challenges. This would be no different. As the days passed, Elon's team began working behind the scenes to roll out a new initiative. Instead of just demanding transparency from the restaurant industry, he would focus on building a platform that allowed businesses in all sectors, restaurants included, to embrace openness and accountability. It would be a system where customers could see not only the products they were purchasing but the entire process behind those products. It was a bold, groundbreaking idea. And it would set the tone for the future. By the time the new initiative was ready for launch, the press coverage of Elon's transparency movement had reached new heights. Media outlets were waiting, breathless for his next move. The stakes were higher than ever. And then, just as he prepared to make his big reveal, another unexpected twist came. A group of high-profile restaurateurs, led by Jonathan Bellamy, announced that they were in the process of launching their own version of the Transparency Initiative, one that would rival Elon's. They would be providing full details of their sourcing, production methods, and even financial records. It was a direct challenge to Musk's vision, and it had the potential to change the game entirely. Elon sat back, watching the announcement unfold on his screen. He couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, frustration, yes, but also a strange sense of validation. The industry was taking him seriously. They were paying attention. But now, the game had shifted. What had started as a personal quest for transparency had just turned into a full-fledged battle for control. And Elon knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The launch of Jonathan Bellamy's Transparency Initiative was a game-changer. What had started as Elon Musk's solo crusade against the lack of transparency in the restaurant industry was now a full-blown competition. Bellamy, the celebrated chef and owner of one of the world's most renowned fine dining restaurants, had thrown down the gauntlet. His initiative wasn't just a mirror of Musk's movement, it was more polished, refined, and marketable. Bellamy had all the charm and credibility of a celebrity chef, and his track record of building an empire made his words far more persuasive. The media frenzy that followed was like a storm. Headlines shifted from focusing solely on Elon to comparing his efforts with Bellamy's. Elon's name, once synonymous with innovation and disruption, was now being juxtaposed against Bellamy's culinary expertise and personal brand. The public, which had been on Elon's side at the outset, was now divided. A question loomed in the air: who was really leading this change? Was it Musk with his tech-driven vision, or Bellamy, the beloved chef with a personal touch? Elon knew he had to act. The longer he waited, the more Bellamy's version of the initiative would take root in the public's mind. He could feel the competitive fire burning within him. This wasn't just about being right anymore, it was about winning. Winning not for the sake of vanity, but to prove that his vision for transparency was the true path forward. He gathered his team at Tesla's headquarters. The room was filled with an air of tension as his closest advisors and engineers prepared for what could be the most important strategic meeting of the year. "Elon, we're already behind the curve with this one," Rachel said, her voice sharp. "Bellamy has the media, the public, and the chefs all backing him. He's making this about his reputation as a chef and his personal connection with the customers. Your approach has always been more tech-centric, but now we need to shift. You need to show them that you're not just another billionaire tech mogul, you're a change agent. You've got the power to influence millions. The problem is that we've been focusing too much on the tech side of things. People are starting to feel disconnected from the cause." Elon paused, absorbing Rachel's words. She was right. His usual strategy, relying on data, facts, and technology, wasn't enough to capture the hearts and minds of the public. They needed something deeper, something personal. I get it, Elon said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. We're not just fighting for transparency in the restaurant industry anymore. We're fighting for the trust of the people. And that's something bigger than any one business or any one person. This has to be about people, their values, their concerns, their trust. That's what Bellamy doesn't understand. He's treating this like a marketing campaign. I'm treating it like a movement. Rachel nodded. Exactly. It's time to make this personal. You've always been able to inspire people by speaking to their deeper needs, whether it was through SpaceX, Tesla, or even the Boring Company. You've got to do the same here. Elon's mind began to race. He had to rethink everything. The message he was putting out needed to be more than just about transparency, it had to be about human connection. He needed to show the world that this wasn't some marketing stunt. It wasn't just about opening up financial records or revealing secret supply chains. It was about giving people a sense of agency, showing them that they could be part of something bigger than themselves. Over the next few days, Elon made changes to his approach. He called for a new press conference. This time, he wasn't just going to announce more data. He was going to announce the creation of a platform, a space for consumers to interact directly with businesses, not just restaurants, but all kinds of industries. This platform would allow people to see not only the products they were buying but also the values that businesses upheld. It would allow businesses to be open and honest with the public, empowering consumers to make informed decisions about where they spent their money. But more than that, Elon planned to make it personal. He would share his own journey, the struggles he had faced in his life, the lessons he had learned, and the mistakes he had made. He would tell the story of his own transformation, from a tech mogul fixated on the future, to a man who had learned to value integrity, accountability, and trust. The press conference was scheduled for the following week. Elon knew this was his chance to take back control of the narrative. He would not only announce the new platform but also share his vision for a world where business wasn't just about profit, it was about creating lasting value for the people. On the day of the press conference, the anticipation was palpable. The room was packed with reporters, industry insiders, and influencers. Cameras flashed as Elon took the stage. He stepped up to the podium, his usual confidence tempered by a rare sense of vulnerability. I want to thank you all for being here today, Elon began. I know that many of you have followed my journey, my companies, my innovations, and the things I've tried to do to change the world. But today, I want to talk about something different. Today, I want to talk about trust. For a long time, I've been focused on the future. On space travel, electric cars, and building the infrastructure for a sustainable future. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized something important: true change doesn't just come from technology. It comes from people. It comes from creating systems where we can trust each other, where businesses and consumers are transparent and accountable to one another. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. I'm launching this platform today not just because I believe in transparency. I'm launching it because I believe in you. The people. You deserve to know what's behind the products you buy, the services you use. You deserve to know who you're supporting with your hard-earned money. And businesses need to step up and show you that they value more than just the bottom line. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling in. Elon continued, his voice steady and sincere. Bellamy has started a conversation about transparency, and I respect that. But this is bigger than any one person. This is about a cultural shift, one that begins with us, every single one of us. And it's going to take all of us to make it happen. As Elon finished, the reporters were left in stunned silence. They hadn't expected this side of him. This was more than just a business pitch. This was a call to action. The public's reaction was immediate. People began flocking to social media, expressing their support. They were inspired by Elon's vulnerability, by his willingness to step out from behind his corporate persona and speak directly to them. But the challenge was far from over. Bellamy's initiative was still out there, and many in the restaurant industry were holding their ground. Elon had thrown down the gauntlet, but now, it was time to see who would rise to meet the challenge. The press conference had been a pivotal moment in Elon's journey. The world had witnessed a side of him that was raw and personal, and for the first time in a long while, the public seemed to listen. Social media erupted with mixed reactions, but there was an undeniable shift in tone. The conversation was no longer just about restaurants or corporate transparency, it was about something bigger. It was about people and the choices they made, the trust they placed in the businesses that shaped their lives. Yet, despite the optimism and renewed support from his followers, Elon knew that this was only the beginning. Bellamy wasn't just going to let Elon's words go unchallenged. In fact, he had already started planning his next move, an exclusive partnership with a major global restaurant chain, designed to roll out the very transparency platform that Elon had announced just days ago. Bellamy was capitalizing on his public persona and his widespread influence in the culinary world, and it was clear that he wasn't backing down without a fight. Elon's mind raced. He needed to act swiftly, but he couldn't afford to rush into another move without a well-thought-out strategy. The platform had to evolve. This wasn't just a race to see who could build the most advanced system, but a battle for public sentiment. The key wasn't just having a technically superior product, it was about being relatable. Showing that his initiative was about more than tech, about more than business, it was about a movement. With Rachel's help, Elon began laying out a new vision. They needed something that would give people a tangible reason to get involved. It couldn't just be another buzzword or another business model, it had to be something that would resonate on a deeply personal level. It was time to bring the platform to life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Elon and his team worked tirelessly to refine the concept. The new platform wouldn't be just a simple transparency tool, it would be a place where businesses could share not only their processes but also the personal stories behind their products. It would be a space where consumers could interact directly with the people behind the brands they supported. They would have access to detailed information about how products were sourced, how workers were treated, and how sustainable practices were integrated into the company's daily operations. But the real genius of the platform was its ability to foster real, meaningful engagement between businesses and their customers. Rather than presenting a one-way flow of information, it would encourage dialogue, allowing consumers to ask questions, share their concerns, and voice their feedback directly to the people who ran the companies they interacted with. Elon knew that this had the potential to change the game entirely. If he could make consumers feel like they were part of the process, like they were actually contributing to the success of businesses that prioritize transparency, it would shift the entire narrative. It would no longer be about Elon Musk pushing a product or trying to compete with Bellamy. It would be about empowering people to make better choices, and giving them the tools to demand more from the businesses they supported. As the new platform began to take shape, the tension between Elon and Bellamy continued to build. Bellamy's platform, while well-received, was far more traditional. It focused on providing raw data, but lacked the personal touch that Elon's initiative promised. Bellamy was banking on his fame and culinary expertise, but it was clear that Elon had something deeper in mind. Then, just as Elon's platform was nearing its official launch, a bombshell dropped. Bellamy, in an unexpected turn of events, announced that he was partnering with a major tech firm, one that had deep ties with SpaceX's biggest competitors. This tech firm, which had been quietly working behind the scenes on its own transparency project, saw Bellamy's platform as the perfect way to enter the consumer-facing side of the business world. Elon was taken aback. The tech firm had always been a competitor in the space industry, but this was a different kind of threat. It wasn't just an issue of innovation anymore, it was about alliances and corporate influence. Bellamy's transparency platform had become a weapon of industry giants. The race was no longer just between two men, it was about positioning, power, and which side could gain the most support from the public. Elon sat back in his chair, staring at the announcement on his screen. He felt the weight of the battle ahead, but this time, the stakes were even higher. This wasn't just a fight over transparency in the restaurant industry. This was a fight for the very future of consumer business relationships. It was a fight that would determine whether the public could trust companies to be accountable, or whether they would continue to be manipulated by the same old systems. That night, Elon stood on the balcony of his Palo Alto home, looking out at the city lights. The glow of the Bay Area reflected the uncertainty that filled his mind. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Rachel. "It's time. You need to make a statement. No more waiting. We have everything ready." He knew she was right. The world was watching, and now it was time for him to step forward again, this time, not just to defend his vision, but to lay out a bold new plan that would unite people, bring businesses to the table, and force transparency to become a real, lasting change. The following morning, Elon called a press conference. This time, however, it wasn't just about launching another initiative, it was about staking his claim in the battle for transparency. "I've watched as this conversation about transparency has evolved," he began, addressing the crowd of reporters. "But what I'm seeing now is a fight for control of a system that should be about empowerment, not just corporate interests. We've been told that transparency is a luxury for businesses, something they can choose to engage in, depending on their brand. But that's not good enough. Transparency is not a choice. It's a right." Elon paused, letting the words settle in. "Today, I'm here to announce the next phase in the fight for transparency, one that is built not just by tech, but by the people. We're creating a system that allows consumers to hold businesses accountable on a deeper level than ever before. This isn't just a tech project. This is a cultural shift. And we need every single one of you to join us." The message was clear. It wasn't just about one man or one platform, it was about something bigger. Something that could change the way people viewed their relationship with businesses forever. Elon's announcement had sent shockwaves through the media, but what followed was just as telling. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive, but there was a new energy in the air, an undercurrent of anticipation and skepticism. Would this truly be the change people had been waiting for, or was it just another flashy attempt to shift the spotlight back to Musk? The spotlight that had once shined so brightly on his ventures now seemed to flicker, caught in the glare of competition. For Elon, the next step was clear. He had to prove that his vision for transparency wasn't just another idea, it was a transformative movement that could reshape the way the public interacted with businesses on a global scale. However, the road ahead was becoming increasingly complex. Bellamy's partnership with the tech giant had put the pressure on, and the restaurant industry, along with several other sectors, were now waiting for their cue. The question was not whether Elon could launch a new platform, it was whether the platform could meet the ever-rising expectations that he had set for it. Elon sat in his office, the usual calm demeanor replaced by the deep focus that characterized his approach to the hardest challenges. Rachel sat across from him, a stack of proposals and data points spread between them. "We're getting a lot of heat from the media," Rachel said, her voice calm but filled with concern. "Bellamy's partnership with that tech firm has made a huge splash. Some of the bigger names in the restaurant world are already aligning with him, pushing the narrative that this is the future of business transparency." Elon leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. "I know, and that's exactly what they want, control of the narrative. But this isn't just about who gets the most restaurant endorsements or who can brand themselves better. This is about people realizing that they deserve more than surface-level transparency. They deserve full, open access. They deserve control." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And you think they'll want it? This kind of transparency? It's massive, Elon. People aren't used to giving up their privacy this way. You're asking for a total paradigm shift." Elon's lips curved into a tight smile. That's why it will work. People want control. What we're offering isn't just an app or a tool, it's an opportunity for consumers to take back the power. We're not just making businesses more accountable. We're changing the relationship between companies and customers. Rachel nodded slowly. And the tech giants? If they see this gaining traction, they won't stand idly by. The moment we release this, there will be a counterattack. You're not just up against Bellamy now, you're up against the biggest names in Silicon Valley. They won't give up their control easily. Let them come, Elon said, his voice hardening with determination. I didn't get here by stepping aside when things got tough. If we're going to make this change, we need to make it bigger than Bellamy. Bigger than anyone. We need to make this about real people. This isn't about who gets to claim the crown, it's about building a new kind of system, one where everyone wins. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, prototypes, and strategy sessions. Elon's team worked around the clock, finalizing the platform. But as the days passed, the situation outside Tesla's walls grew more tense. Bellamy's restaurant partners were already beginning to implement his transparency system in a limited rollout, claiming success. They boasted about how consumers could now see detailed breakdowns of a meal's origins, from farm to plate. Their platform had a polished look, sleek and professional, exactly the kind of image Bellamy wanted to project. Meanwhile, Elon's team was preparing for the full-scale launch of their platform, a revolutionary system built not only to allow transparency into industries like restaurants but also to give people insight into nearly every sector, from agriculture to manufacturing to technology. It would give consumers the power to engage directly with businesses, ask questions, and learn about the deeper implications of the products they used. Unlike Bellamy's focus on raw data, Elon's platform was built to encourage meaningful interactions between businesses and consumers. Elon knew they were walking a fine line. To succeed, they needed to offer transparency that was not just functional, but engaging, something that would make people want to be part of it, not just use it as a tool. The platform needed to feel personal, to make people feel like they were a part of something important. The day of the launch arrived, and the anticipation was palpable. News outlets had been teasing the event for weeks, and as Elon stood on stage, surrounded by his team, the excitement in the room was undeniable. But behind that excitement was a sense of quiet tension. This wasn't just about launching a platform. It was about launching a revolution. I'm proud to stand before you today, Elon began, his voice carrying the weight of his conviction. But I'm even more proud to share with you something that goes beyond any technology we've ever built. This is about people, their power, their voice, their ability to demand more from the businesses that serve them. This platform isn't just a new tech solution, it's the beginning of something new. It's a chance for consumers to reclaim their trust in the brands they buy from. He paused, glancing around at the crowd, his gaze steady. We're creating a world where transparency is no longer optional. Where businesses, no matter how big or small, will be held accountable not just by regulators or organizations, but by the people. Consumers deserve to know the truth about the products they purchase, the companies they support. They deserve to know the values behind every decision. As he spoke, a live demo began, showing the platform in action. The interface was sleek, user-friendly, and visually appealing. Consumers could browse through detailed information on thousands of products, engage directly with businesses, and even participate in live Q&A sessions with company representatives. Every product had its full story laid out, where it came from, who made it, how it was made, and most importantly, how it aligned with the values consumers cared about. The demonstration was a success, and the platform went live to an enthusiastic response. Within hours, social media was buzzing with excitement, as people began to share their experiences and interact with the platform. But Bellamy wasn't done. He immediately issued a response. His own platform had just secured another major restaurant partnership, and this time, the company had promised to roll out full transparency in its supply chain within weeks. Bellamy's supporters were quick to claim victory, while many in Elon's camp remained hopeful that the true value of Elon's platform would become evident in the days to come. The days following the launch were a whirlwind of activity. Elon's platform was gaining traction quickly, with users flooding the site to explore its features. It was clear that people were hungry for transparency in a way they hadn't been before. Consumers were finding value in being able to connect with businesses directly and see the stories behind their products. It wasn't just about the raw data, it was about the deeper connection that the platform facilitated between brands and their customers. But Bellamy wasn't backing down. His platform continued to expand with the restaurant industry's backing, and now it was making waves across the broader food service sector. Media outlets were playing up the battle for transparency narrative, framing the situation as a competition between Elon and Bellamy, with both vying for control of a rapidly growing market. While the public was still divided over which platform was superior, there was one clear advantage Elon held: his platform had become a symbol of something much larger than just business. It was a statement, a movement that championed the idea of consumers taking ownership over their relationship with companies. It wasn't just about food anymore, it was about power, empowerment, and trust. Elon sat in his office, watching the metrics of his platform climb steadily. It was an exciting moment, but there was an uneasy feeling in his chest. The competition was fierce, and though his platform was doing well, he couldn't help but think about the larger forces at play. Bellamy had played the game strategically, positioning himself as a hero of the restaurant industry, someone who genuinely understood the importance of transparency in food sourcing. Elon knew that Bellamy had tapped into something fundamental: people wanted to trust the food they ate, just like they wanted to trust the companies they bought from. It wasn't just a business problem, it was a societal issue. But was this enough for people to fully embrace Elon's vision of global transparency? "Rachel," Elon said, breaking the silence, "we need to step up the game. The restaurant industry is just one part of this puzzle. We need to show people that transparency is a right, not a privilege." Rachel looked up from her screen, her brow furrowing. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking bigger. We need to show the world how this can apply to every single industry," Elon replied. "Not just food. Think about clothing, electronics, transportation. This platform could change everything, but only if we get people to see how it fits into their daily lives." Rachel nodded, understanding where he was going. "So, you want to launch a wider campaign, something that shows just how deeply this transparency could impact all industries?" "Exactly. It's time for the next step. Let's show them that transparency isn't just about understanding where their food comes from. It's about understanding the impact of every purchase they make. We need to push the message that people should be able to trace their clothing, their gadgets, their cars, everything they use." The idea was ambitious, but Elon was always driven by big visions. He wanted to build a platform that transcended one industry and tapped into every corner of consumer culture. To do this, he needed to prove that his vision wasn't just about transparency in food. It was about transparency in every product, service, and industry, every place where consumers were spending their hard-earned money. Elon began to outline his next move: an international launch. This wouldn't be just another press release. This would be a global awareness campaign to promote the idea of a transparent world where businesses couldn't hide behind closed doors anymore. He envisioned billboards in major cities, digital ads everywhere, and global events where consumers would get the chance to learn about the platform and ask questions directly. Meanwhile, Bellamy's camp was responding in kind. They had already partnered with international restaurant chains, expanding their reach beyond the borders of the U.S. Their transparency platform was now being integrated into restaurant menus, allowing customers to see real-time data about every dish. What Bellamy had that Elon didn't was the established reputation and trust within the food industry. He was the face of fine dining, and that gave him a significant edge when it came to securing corporate partnerships. But despite his progress, Bellamy had his own struggles. The growing number of restaurant owners who had jumped on the transparency bandwagon began demanding more control over their own data. They weren't satisfied with simply displaying a broad overview of their sourcing practices. They wanted even deeper metrics. Some restaurant owners even started pushing back on the fees that Bellamy's platform charged for these integrations. The business was starting to feel less like a smooth ride and more like a balancing act. Bellamy was aware of the growing tension, but he kept his cool. He knew that in business, it wasn't just about building a platform, it was about maintaining control over the narrative. And the narrative, as far as he was concerned, was still firmly in his favor. Back at Tesla, Elon was preparing for his next big move. The global transparency campaign was a massive undertaking, but it was the only way to truly take the fight to Bellamy. He knew that the key to winning wasn't just about technology, it was about culture. It was about making transparency feel not just like a luxury, but a necessity. It was about making the public feel empowered and, most importantly, invested in the success of the platform. His team worked tirelessly to create a global digital ad campaign, with an emphasis on showcasing the personal stories behind the businesses. Rather than simply presenting statistics, the ads would feature real people, the farmers, the factory workers, the designers, and the consumers themselves, all sharing their voices in a conversation about what transparency meant for their daily lives. The campaign launched with an overwhelming response. The first wave of ads featured an emotional video of a single mother purchasing clothes for her children, showing the behind-the-scenes story of how the clothing was made, who made it, where, and under what conditions. The ad ended with a simple, powerful message: you deserve to know. Transparency is your right. The response was immediate. Social media exploded with debates and discussions. For the first time, the public was asking themselves, how much do I really know about what I buy? And with that question came a growing sense of urgency. People began demanding more from the businesses they supported. They wanted more than just promises, they wanted proof. Bellamy, watching from the sidelines, wasn't oblivious to the impact of the campaign. He knew that it was only a matter of time before his platform would be directly compared to Elon's, and he couldn't afford to be complacent. But as the pressure mounted, Bellamy started to sense a shift in the air. This wasn't just a battle for restaurant transparency. This was a battle for the future of consumer choice. And in that moment, Bellamy realized that no matter how hard he tried to control the narrative, he couldn't stop the growing tide of change. People were waking up, and they were demanding to know more. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The momentum from Elon's global transparency campaign was undeniable. It felt like a tidal wave crashing against the shores of traditional business practices. Social media was buzzing, news outlets were covering the movement in depth, and people were genuinely questioning the way they interacted with the businesses they patronized. Consumers were demanding more than just the standard, made with care, labels. They wanted proof, and they wanted transparency. Elon's platform had ignited a conversation that felt more like a societal revolution than a business endeavor. However, not everyone was on board. While the public reaction was largely positive, there was a growing backlash from some of the largest corporations in the world, particularly those in industries like tech, manufacturing, and fashion. These companies had long operated under the belief that consumer trust could be built through slick marketing and limited access to information. They didn't want to give consumers too much insight into their practices. It was about control, and transparency was, in their eyes, a threat to that control. Bellamy's platform had already gained widespread support in the restaurant industry, but Elon's push was different. His platform wasn't just catering to one sector, it was addressing a global need for accountability and authenticity across the board. As the pressure mounted, Bellamy, too, began to feel the heat. Elon sat at his desk, scrolling through the latest reports on his platform's success. The numbers were impressive, but they also came with some troubling signs. The corporate world was beginning to organize against him. Major players were ramping up their lobbying efforts, attempting to sway public opinion and government officials in an attempt to block the kind of transparency Elon was promoting. The backlash had started small, just a few industry leaders making their displeasure known on social media. But now, it was becoming more formal. Lawsuits were filed, demanding that Elon's platform be held to stricter privacy standards. Corporate lobbying groups were pressuring lawmakers to regulate platforms like Elon's that demanded so much data from businesses. "Rachel," Elon said, his voice sharp. "We're going to need to shift gears. The tech industry is mobilizing against us." Rachel sighed and leaned back in her chair, already aware of the situation. "I've seen the reports. They're not going to make this easy for us. These companies aren't just upset, they're digging in their heels. They don't want consumers to have the power to see the inner workings of their businesses. It's a threat to their model. They're fighting back hard." Elon's jaw tightened. "I knew it was coming, but this is more than just a few bad headlines. If they get a hold of this narrative, it could derail everything. We're not just talking about food and restaurants anymore. This is about a global shift in power, how information flows, who controls it, and who benefits from it." Rachel paused, thinking carefully. "So, what's the play? Do we go after them directly? Or do we stay focused on building support with the public?" "We need both," Elon said, his eyes hardening with determination. "We can't just play defense. We have to show people that this isn't just about access to data. This is about accountability, about making businesses treat consumers with respect. But at the same time, we need to prepare for the battle they're about to bring to Washington." Across the country, Bellamy was watching the situation unfold with a sense of cautious satisfaction. He had been quick to recognize the power of the transparency movement, but he also knew that the corporate backlash would work to his advantage. While Elon was building a new platform for accountability, Bellamy's strategy had always been more about leveraging his existing industry relationships. Bellamy wasn't challenging the status quo, he was joining it, and in doing so, he was playing the game by the rules. Bellamy's platform was designed to appeal to both consumers and the companies themselves. He wasn't forcing businesses to give up too much information, just enough to prove they were transparent. He was easing the corporate world into the idea of accountability, slowly and steadily, without shaking things up too dramatically. For now, that made him the safer bet. Companies were more willing to align with Bellamy, knowing he would protect their interests. The next few days were a blur of legal battles, media responses, and heated meetings. Elon's team was scrambling to defend the integrity of the platform, while corporate lobbyists were pushing for tighter regulations on transparency and data protection. A few high-profile lawsuits were filed, accusing Elon's platform of violating privacy standards and breaching consumer trust. The lawsuits were grounded in concerns over how much personal information the platform collected in order to provide businesses with the level of detail required for transparency. But it wasn't just the legal battles that were weighing on Elon. The media response was becoming increasingly polarized. Some outlets were praising the transparency revolution, calling it a necessary step toward holding businesses accountable. But others were stoking fear, warning that the movement could disrupt entire industries and put personal privacy at risk. Elon knew that his next move would be critical. The momentum he had built was too important to let slip away, but he couldn't afford to alienate his core supporters or become a target for corporate interests. A few days later, Elon held a press conference to address the growing backlash. He stood before a packed room of journalists, the cameras flashing, the air thick with anticipation. Elon didn't flinch. He had been in front of the media countless times before, but today felt different. This wasn't just about technology or business. It was about defending a belief in the power of transparency to change the world. "Thank you all for being here," Elon began, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "I want to address the concerns that have been raised about the platform and the future of transparency. I've heard the critics, and I understand their fears. But let me be clear, we are not here to violate privacy. We are here to empower consumers and to hold businesses accountable. We are creating a world where information is not hoarded by a few, but shared by many. He paused, letting the words sink in. We live in a world where corporations control the narrative. They control the story behind the products we buy, the food we eat, and the services we use. We're asking for transparency, yes. But we're also asking for a world where people are no longer in the dark. People deserve to know where their food comes from, where their clothes are made, where their electronics are produced, and most importantly, how they are made. We believe that everyone has the right to this knowledge. The room was silent. Elon could feel the weight of the moment. This was more than just a press conference, it was a declaration of intent. He wasn't going to back down, no matter the backlash. The response was mixed. Some praised Elon's speech, applauding his commitment to transparency in consumer rights. Others, however, accused him of overreaching and threatening personal privacy. Media outlets continued to fuel the fire, highlighting the legal battles and potential threats to the future of businesses that relied on limited access to information. Elon knew that the fight was far from over, but he wasn't backing down. This was his vision, and he believed it was worth fighting for. The days after Elon's press conference were filled with a nervous energy that seemed to ripple through every corner of the business world. It wasn't just the media coverage or the protests from corporate lobbyists, it was the sheer magnitude of what Elon had set in motion. His campaign for global transparency wasn't just a business initiative, it had become a social movement. But with any movement that threatens to overturn the status quo, there would always be a reckoning. The backlash, which had already been growing, now reached a fever pitch. Industry giants who had previously stayed neutral in the debate were being pressured by their investors and boards to take a stand. Many were quietly making deals with Bellamy, seeking the more conservative route, one that didn't involve the same kind of radical shift that Elon's platform demanded. In contrast, Elon's supporters were doubling down. Environmentalists, human rights groups, and consumer rights organizations all rallied around him. They believed in the promise of a transparent world where corporations could no longer operate behind closed doors. They believed that the public deserved to know where their products came from, how they were made, and who was benefiting from them. But as the conversation around transparency began to deepen, new issues emerged. Questions about how much data was too much, how to protect consumer privacy without compromising on access to information, and whether the people who stood to lose the most, corporate giants, would fight back with everything they had. Elon sat at a round table with his core team, scanning the latest reports. The lawsuits were multiplying, and even worse, a few key investors were beginning to waver in their support. They were afraid of the uncertain regulatory environment and the growing chorus of critics who claimed that transparency could destroy industries. Elon could see the pressure mounting in their eyes as they spoke. Elon, one of his lead investors, Daniel, said hesitantly, "This is becoming a political issue, not just a business issue. We're getting threats from all sides, legal challenges, boycotts, and now even government scrutiny. The momentum you've created is incredible, but we're starting to lose the trust of the big players. I'm not sure how much longer we can keep pushing like this." Elon leaned forward, his fingers steepled together. He had heard these concerns before, but something in Daniel's voice told him that this was different. The stakes were higher now. The regulatory pressure was growing, and so was the real possibility that the platform could be regulated into the ground before it even had a chance to truly flourish. "I knew it wouldn't be easy," Elon said, his voice calm but firm. "And I didn't get into this to play it safe. If the platform dies, then we know for sure that the system was never going to change. If we have to fight for every inch, that's what we'll do." Rachel, sitting across from him, nodded in agreement. "But it's more than just fighting for a platform. It's fighting for the idea of a world where transparency is a standard, not a privilege. We're not just about food or clothing, we're about changing the way the world works, about making every industry accountable to the people they serve. Elon stood up, pacing slowly. Exactly. I'm not going to back down because of fear. The only way to make this world better is by doing something radical. People are demanding it. You can feel it in the air. This isn't just about money or business anymore, it's about rewriting the rules of engagement between corporations and consumers. Rachel's expression softened, but there was still concern. But what about Bellamy? He's playing the safe game. He's winning the restaurant industry. We can't afford to ignore that. Elon stopped pacing and looked at her. Bellamy is playing to the status quo. He's not creating real change, he's just patching up the old system. We need to go bigger. We need to show the world that transparency is more than just a corporate buzzword. It's a call to action. A new era. Meanwhile, Bellamy was facing a different kind of pressure. His platform had grown exponentially in the restaurant industry, but he knew that Elon's efforts in the tech and manufacturing sectors were starting to gain ground. Restaurants, which had been the backbone of his platform, were now feeling the heat. Some owners were questioning whether the transparency Bellamy promoted was truly enough. They wanted deeper insights, more control over the data, and more significant incentives to participate. Some of them were also beginning to wonder whether they had made the right choice, aligning themselves with a platform that didn't promise a complete overhaul of the industry. Bellamy sat in his office, reviewing the latest metrics and reports. While his platform was thriving, a small but significant group of restaurant owners had begun to voice their concerns. They wanted more from Bellamy's transparency platform, more insight into their competitors' data, more control over the customer experience. They wanted to move beyond just sourcing transparency and tackle the root issues of labor practices, pay equity, and sustainability. Back in the restaurant industry, protests were beginning to erupt in various major cities. Workers were demanding to see more information about the labor conditions in the kitchens and supply chains of some of the biggest restaurant chains. They wanted to know whether their food was produced ethically, whether the people who worked behind the scenes were treated fairly, and whether they themselves were being paid equitably. Some restaurant owners, who had previously embraced Bellamy's platform as a solution to the transparency problem, were now starting to push back. They felt as though the data they were providing was only scratching the surface and that they were being forced to reveal more and more without a clear understanding of what they were gaining in return. For the first time, Bellamy felt the weight of the industry on his shoulders. The critics were getting louder. The pressure to go further with transparency was growing. Elon knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. The cracks were starting to show in Bellamy's carefully crafted empire. He wasn't prepared to go as far as Elon was, and that could be his downfall. Elon had always believed in pushing the boundaries, but Bellamy had chosen to take the middle road. He had embraced transparency, but only to a certain point. The fight between the two had reached a new stage. It wasn't just about food anymore, it was about whether true transparency could change the world, or whether the industry could keep hiding behind partial truths and carefully curated stories. The battle for consumer trust was intensifying, and it was anyone's game. Elon was determined to see this through to the end. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for the fight. The pressure had never been greater. Elon's platform was becoming a lightning rod for controversy. The criticisms of corporate interests were louder than ever, and the legal battles were escalating. Bellamy, on the other hand, had managed to keep a more controlled, steady approach, positioning himself as the pragmatist in the fight for transparency. But as the stakes grew higher, so did the stakes for both men. Elon knew this was it, the point of no return. If he wanted to win, he had to go all in. There was no halfway, no retreat. It was time to force a confrontation that would change everything. It was an unusually cold morning when Elon received the news that would shake the foundations of his entire movement. A powerful coalition of tech giants, manufacturing leaders, and retail conglomerates had united behind Bellamy. They were planning a counteroffensive, a massive, coordinated campaign aimed at discrediting Elon's platform and convincing the public that transparency wasn't just impractical, it was dangerous. In a series of interviews, Bellamy had begun to publicly criticize Elon's tactics, claiming that his vision was too radical and impractical. He painted Elon's platform as an existential threat to the business world, one that would upend economies and destabilize industries. The backlash was fierce, and the rhetoric around Elon's vision shifted from support for transparency to a full-blown debate about the dangers of uncontrolled information. This was the moment Elon had been dreading. It was one thing to deal with a few industry leaders or media outlets questioning his ideas, but now, the most powerful forces in the business world were uniting against him. Elon sat in his office, watching the news as Bellamy's campaign played out in real time. Bellamy had struck first, and the media was lapping it up. Transparency is a myth, Bellamy said in one high-profile interview. In reality, giving consumers all this information can be detrimental. Businesses need to have the space to operate, innovate, and grow. If we open the floodgates, we risk exposing too much, including sensitive data that could be weaponized or misused. It was a smart move on Bellamy's part, appealing to the public's fears while maintaining his polished, corporate-friendly image. But Elon wasn't about to back down. If anything, Bellamy's attack only confirmed that he was right. The old guard was scared. "Rachel," Elon said, pacing back and forth, his voice steady but filled with intensity. "This is it. Bellamy is playing dirty. He's using fear to win over the masses. We need to show them that transparency is the future, not the past." Rachel leaned forward, her expression serious. "We know that, but he's got the backing of every major corporation. If we don't act fast, this could snowball into something we can't control." Elon nodded, his mind racing. The path forward was clear. They would need to confront Bellamy head-on, but this time, they couldn't just respond to his arguments. They had to go on the offensive. They had to expose the cracks in Bellamy's platform and force him into a position where he had no choice but to either back down or admit that he was part of the problem. Days later, Elon stood on stage in front of a packed auditorium, his demeanor calm but resolute. The lights were blinding, the audience hushed in anticipation. This was a pivotal moment. The future of his platform, of the transparency movement itself, depended on what he said next. "Thank you all for being here," Elon began, his voice clear and strong. "Today, I want to talk about the truth. About what's really happening in the business world today. We've been told for too long that the way things are is the way things should be. We've been told that businesses need to keep their operations secret, that consumer data should be controlled by a few powerful players." He paused, letting the words sink in. But here's the thing, this narrative is a lie. It's a lie that has been perpetuated to maintain control. To keep the public in the dark. To let industries operate in the shadows. The crowd shifted, and Elon could feel the intensity building. Transparency isn't a threat. It's a solution. It's the way forward, and it's something the world is demanding. I'm not here to sugarcoat it. This fight isn't going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. But we're ready. We will not back down. Elon's words were bold, but it was his next statement that would send shockwaves through the crowd. Bellamy claims that we cannot handle the truth, that giving consumers all the information they need will hurt businesses, hurt innovation. But what he's really saying is that he wants to keep things just the way they are. He wants to protect the status quo, the same status quo that has exploited workers, manipulated consumers, and stifled true innovation. A murmur ran through the crowd as they processed Elon's words. The tension was palpable. We know better. We've seen what happens when the truth is hidden. We've seen how the powerful can manipulate the system to their advantage. It's time for a change. A real change. A transparent world where businesses have to answer to the people they serve, not the other way around. Back in the corporate world, Bellamy's team was scrambling to respond. They had underestimated Elon's resilience, and his bold public statements had thrown them off guard. Bellamy, ever the smooth operator, knew that this was his moment to regain control of the narrative. He scheduled a public debate with Elon. The battle lines had been drawn. The day of the debate arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The media was buzzing, and social media was flooded with anticipation. Elon and Bellamy were about to face off, live on stage, with millions of eyes watching. It would be the ultimate test of their vision for the future. Elon entered the stage first, his confident posture sending a clear message. He was ready. Bellamy followed shortly after, his usual polished, well-tailored persona on full display. The two men shook hands, but the tension was undeniable. The debate began, and the questions came fast and furious. Bellamy immediately went on the attack, painting Elon's platform as reckless, unsustainable, and out of touch with the realities of running a business. Transparency is important, yes, Bellamy said, but at what cost? When you push businesses too hard, when you demand too much information, you risk destroying everything. Elon fired back with equal force. Bellamy's argument is based on fear. Fear of change. Fear of losing control. But the real question we should be asking is this: what kind of world do we want to live in? One where businesses can hide behind closed doors, or one where they are held accountable for their actions? The audience was on the edge of their seats as the two men clashed, each presenting their vision for the future. By the end of the debate, there was no clear victor. The audience was divided, and the media was left to weigh in. Some saw Elon's passion and vision for transparency as a breath of fresh air, while others still clung to Bellamy's more cautious approach. Elon knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for transparency was far from over. But one thing was clear: he had shown the world that he would never back down. The aftermath of the debate was nothing short of a media frenzy. News outlets covered every angle: Elon's impassioned speech, Bellamy's calm yet forceful rebuttals, and the sharp divide in public opinion. Some hailed Elon as a visionary, others called him naive. Bellamy, for his part, had maintained his composed, corporate-friendly persona, but many in the business world now wondered if he had underestimated the strength of Elon's movement. For weeks, the debate raged on. In boardrooms, homes, and online forums, people argued fiercely about which approach to transparency was better for the future. The tensions were palpable. And as the dust settled, something unexpected began to emerge: the tide was slowly shifting in Elon's favor. One morning, Elon sat in his office, scanning through the latest data on his platform's usage. He had just received word that several major corporations, those that had once been staunch opponents of his vision, had begun to rethink their stance. Some had even approached him with proposals to collaborate. The public response was clear: the world was ready for change. Rachel burst into his office, a wide grin on her face. "Elon, you won't believe it. We're getting a flood of new partnerships. It's happening, businesses are reaching out to us." Elon looked up from his tablet, his face a mixture of surprise and quiet satisfaction. "What do you mean? How many?" "Big ones," Rachel said, her excitement palpable. "The consumer goods companies are starting to jump on board. And get this, some restaurants are beginning to come to us, asking about ways to integrate deeper transparency. Bellamy's platform is still strong, but we're seeing cracks in the armor. People are beginning to realize that his cautious approach isn't enough." Elon smiled, but his mind was already working. This was just the beginning. He had predicted this shift, but now he had to act decisively. The corporations coming to him were recognizing something they hadn't before: Elon wasn't just selling transparency, he was selling the future. Meanwhile, Bellamy was watching the shift with growing concern. The conversations he had with investors and executives were no longer one-sided. People who had once seen his cautious approach as the only way forward were starting to question the long-term sustainability of that model. He sat in a sleek conference room, flanked by his senior advisors, trying to come up with a plan. "We've got to pivot," Bellamy said, his voice tight. "Elon's movement is gaining too much traction. If we keep sticking to the same old narrative, we'll lose everything." One of his senior advisors, Marissa, leaned forward. "You're right. We've built a good platform, but it's just not enough anymore. People want more." The idea of complete transparency, as crazy as it sounded at first, is beginning to resonate with the public. "We need to innovate, or we risk being left behind." Bellamy took a deep breath. He hated the idea of changing course, but he knew they had no choice. "What are you suggesting?" "We need to reframe the narrative. Instead of fighting Elon's vision, we need to align with it, but on our terms. We can position ourselves as the responsible face of transparency. We can't go as far as he wants, but we can offer more than what we're giving now. We need to move quickly, or we'll be irrelevant." Bellamy nodded slowly. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it might be the only way to salvage his reputation and stay competitive. Back in Elon's camp, the momentum was building faster than ever. The new partnerships were coming in, and more importantly, the global reach of his platform was expanding. He had not only disrupted the restaurant industry but was now in discussions with tech firms, manufacturers, and even governments about implementing more radical transparency measures. Elon and his team were working tirelessly to fine-tune the platform, making it more accessible and impactful. The idea was simple: every piece of information that could be made public, from sourcing to manufacturing processes, would be made available to consumers. It wasn't just about food anymore, it was about everything. One afternoon, Elon received an unexpected call. It was from a government representative in Europe, one of the major players in the global economy. The representative wanted to meet to discuss the possibility of integrating transparency measures into their national trade policies. The momentum was undeniable. "This could be it," Elon said to Rachel after the call ended. "If we get European support, it'll open doors worldwide. We can bring the entire global economy under the microscope." Rachel's eyes lit up. This could change everything. It's not just about private companies anymore, it's about entire nations adopting our model. The next few weeks were filled with intense negotiations, but the breakthrough finally came. Elon secured a partnership with several key European nations, who agreed to pilot his transparency platform within their own markets. The deal sent shockwaves through the business world. For the first time, a government-backed transparency initiative was becoming a reality, and it wasn't under Bellamy's model, it was under Elon's. The news broke on every major news outlet. It was everywhere. Elon Musk, the maverick who had once been written off as too radical, was now on the verge of changing global business practices. Governments were beginning to take his platform seriously, and corporations had no choice but to follow suit. Bellamy, now seeing the writing on the wall, made his move. He called a press conference, hoping to reclaim some of the ground he had lost. His team worked overtime to prepare, and when the day arrived, he stood in front of the cameras with the air of a man who knew he had to offer something new. "We've heard the loud voices calling for radical change," Bellamy began, his voice steady. "And we understand the call for more transparency in our world. But we also recognize the importance of balance, of creating systems that are not only open but also secure and sustainable. Our platform was built on the belief that transparency should be incremental and responsible." He paused, waiting for the cameras to flash. "We're proud of what we've achieved, but we're also committed to evolving. We will now be introducing new features to our platform, features that go beyond food and clothing and into the supply chains of technology and energy. We're listening to the public, and we're adjusting our approach." The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some praised Bellamy for adapting, but others saw it as too little, too late. The world was already moving forward with Elon's vision. In the wake of the press conference, Elon's team continued to push ahead. They had the wind at their backs now, but they knew they couldn't afford to slow down. The battle for transparency was far from over. Bellamy may have been playing catch-up, but the fight for the soul of business was just beginning. And as the weeks passed, it became increasingly clear that there was no turning back. Elon Musk wasn't just trying to change one industry, he was trying to change the world. And the world was starting to listen. The news of Elon's partnership with European governments spread like wildfire, causing ripples in the business world that no one could have anticipated. The idea that entire nations were backing a transparency platform, one that scrutinized everything from food production to corporate supply chains, was revolutionary. No longer were Elon's ideas confined to lofty speeches and controversial debates, they were becoming policy, becoming a reality. Within weeks, companies that had been hesitant were scrambling to catch up. They faced an increasingly harsh decision: adapt to this new world of transparency, or risk being left behind. The movement was no longer an abstract concept, it was a global mandate, one that left no room for hesitation. And for Bellamy, who had once dominated the narrative, it felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. Elon watched it all unfold from his headquarters in Silicon Valley, a place that had once felt like the center of his own private universe but now seemed like the hub of something much larger, a movement that was changing the world. Rachel sat across from him, reviewing the latest data. The shift is happening faster than we expected. These partnerships are snowballing. Companies that were publicly criticizing us are now reaching out for consultations on how they can integrate transparency into their operations. Elon nodded thoughtfully. It's exactly what we wanted. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. And sometimes, you need to be the one to push it over the edge. That's true, Rachel agreed. But the real question now is, what's next? We've got the ball rolling, but how do we ensure it doesn't stop? Elon's gaze turned inward, his mind already ahead of the game. Now we take it global. If governments are on board, we need to push for more countries to adopt similar policies. Let's keep the momentum going. It's not just about businesses anymore, it's about shaping the future of society itself. Back on the other side of the battle, Bellamy had spent days locked in meetings with his team, trying to strategize how he could fight back against the sudden surge in support for Elon's platform. It was clear that the business world was starting to favor Elon's vision, but Bellamy wasn't ready to give up. He was determined to carve out a niche for his approach, to prove that his more measured, incremental model was the only sustainable way forward. He had one card left to play: the private sector. While the public sector had begun to embrace Elon's vision, Bellamy still had significant influence in corporate circles. He knew that there were powerful CEOs who feared the long-term implications of fully transparent supply chains. They weren't ready for the seismic changes Elon was advocating. And if he could sway them, he could buy himself enough time to regroup. The following week, Bellamy appeared on a major financial news network, addressing the growing concerns over transparency. He was calm, composed, but underneath his collected exterior, there was an urgency that couldn't be ignored. "The world is changing," Bellamy said, his voice steady, but with a hint of warning. "But what we need to remember is that change doesn't come without consequences. Transparency is vital, yes. But it's a double-edged sword. Without proper regulation, without careful oversight, we risk undermining the very systems that allow our economy to function." The interviewer pressed him further. "Are you saying we should slow down? That we shouldn't move toward greater transparency?" "I'm not saying we should stop. I'm saying we need to be responsible. We need to understand the broader impact of these decisions, and we need to ensure that we're not just throwing caution to the wind." Bellamy's words were careful, calculated. He was positioning himself as the voice of reason, the one willing to face the complexities of the modern world, while Elon's approach seemed too simplistic, too radical. He wasn't going to give up on the narrative he had built for years. He believed in it. The next day, a new report surfaced, showing that some of the world's largest tech companies were now backing Bellamy's platform in light of his recent interview. Responsible transparency was becoming the new buzzword. Bellamy's rhetoric was starting to catch on with key players who had been initially skeptical of Elon's rapid push for change. Elon wasn't surprised. He had known from the beginning that Bellamy's corporate influence was powerful. But he wasn't about to be distracted by a few companies trying to backpedal. The fight was far from over, but every time Bellamy tried to frame the debate as one of caution versus recklessness, it only reinforced Elon's point: the status quo had never been enough. A few days later, Elon found himself on a private jet, heading to a summit in Brussels where he was scheduled to meet with global leaders about expanding his transparency initiative. The summit had already attracted a great deal of media attention, with world leaders eager to discuss the future of corporate responsibility. As he sat in the quiet of the jet, Elon couldn't help but think back to the early days when no one took his ideas seriously. Now, he was at the heart of a movement that was pushing the boundaries of what business could, and should, be. Rachel sat across from him, tapping away on her tablet. "Elon, there's something we should consider before the summit. I've been hearing rumors that Bellamy is trying to introduce his own version of transparency at the policy level. He's gaining traction with some of the governments in Europe who are still hesitant to embrace full transparency." Elon raised an eyebrow. "So he's playing the political game now, huh? Interesting. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but it's getting to the point where he's trying to steal our thunder on the global stage." Rachel nodded. "Yes, he's positioning himself as the middle ground, the more cautious, business-friendly option. If we don't act fast, he could win over some key policymakers." Elon's expression turned steely. "I've seen this play before. Bellamy's not just trying to slow us down, he's trying to take control of the narrative. He won't succeed. We'll make sure of that." The summit was a defining moment. With leaders from around the world gathered in one place, Elon was ready to take the stage. It was his chance to solidify his platform as the global standard for business transparency. His presentation was a masterclass in persuasion, clear, concise, and full of data-backed evidence showing that transparency not only helped consumers but also benefited companies by building trust and loyalty. Elon knew that the future was already here. Now, it was just a matter of helping others see it. As he finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't just a success, it was a victory. That evening, as he watched the sunset over the city of Brussels, Elon felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had faced countless battles and setbacks, but this moment felt different. But just as he was about to relax, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Rachel: "Bellamy's pushing hard for a new regulation in Europe. We need to act fast before he locks it down." The game was far from over. Elon's victory at the summit in Brussels had given him the global momentum he had been striving for. But just as the applause faded, the real battle was beginning. The world had turned its eyes to him, and now more than ever, every move he made would be scrutinized. The shift toward full transparency had become a global conversation, but the fight for what kind of transparency would dominate was far from settled. As the plane carrying him back to the US ascended into the clouds, Elon sat back in his seat, the weight of the situation settling on him. This wasn't just a win for him, it was a win for the future of business. But his mind was already racing, anticipating the next challenge. And that challenge was Bellamy. Back in Silicon Valley, Bellamy was far from backing down. Despite Elon's success in Brussels, he wasn't about to let his rival claim the narrative. Bellamy had taken a different approach. Instead of fighting on Elon's terms, he would double down on his own model, portraying it as the more measured, more sustainable path to transparency. His latest move was to rally the support of some of the largest corporations in the tech industry, companies that were not only influential but also deeply integrated into the political landscape. Bellamy's pitch was clear: transparency was important, but so was stability. If the world were to pivot too quickly, he warned, there could be unintended consequences, particularly in the global supply chain and the economy at large. But Bellamy wasn't just talking to businesses. He had a larger play in mind. he was quietly lobbying for new regulations that would allow for a more controlled version of transparency to become the standard. He wanted governments to adopt a framework that would be flexible and gradual, avoiding the seismic shifts that Elon's model would inevitably bring. Elon's team had been monitoring Bellamy's moves closely, and Rachel was the first to catch wind of the new regulations Bellamy was pushing. She had received a tip from an insider that Bellamy was meeting with high-ranking EU officials to introduce legislation that would make gradual transparency mandatory for corporations, with heavy oversight by government agencies. The goal was to implement these regulations in a way that would seem like a victory for transparency while still maintaining control over the speed and scope of change. "Damn it," Rachel muttered as she read through the details of Bellamy's proposed regulations. "He's trying to outsmart us by making it look like he's playing the responsible card." Elon looked up from his phone, where he'd been reviewing upcoming presentations. "What do you mean?" "This new regulation he's pushing could undercut everything we've worked for. If it passes, it'll become the new standard, but it'll be slower, more measured. He's creating a version of transparency that's palatable to corporations, and if it's implemented, it will put us at a serious disadvantage." Elon leaned back, thinking. So, he's playing the long game, trying to box us in by making transparency seem less radical, less threatening. "It's not a bad strategy. It's a brilliant strategy, actually," Rachel said, her frustration mounting. "But we can't let him succeed. If we don't act fast, Bellamy will be the one dictating the pace of change, not us." The next morning, Elon gathered his closest advisors to strategize. He knew that Bellamy's influence was growing, but he also knew that his own platform was stronger than ever. Still, he couldn't ignore the fact that Bellamy had a powerful network in the political world, and that was something Elon had always been careful to avoid. His goal had always been to work outside the confines of government regulation, pushing companies and consumers to demand more transparency on their own. But now, Bellamy was threatening to change the very landscape of business governance. "We need to fight this," Elon said, his voice determined. "But not with more regulations. We need to make sure the conversation stays about radical transparency. The whole world is watching us, and we need to make sure that Bellamy's slow, incremental approach doesn't take hold." One of Elon's advisors, Mark, a former tech policy expert, leaned forward. "Elon's right. The last thing we want is for governments to step in and control how transparency works. If we allow Bellamy to frame the conversation as responsible regulation, it'll be harder to push for true change in the long run." Rachel nodded. "We need a counter-strategy, something bold, something that proves that radical transparency doesn't have to be slow. We can't wait for Bellamy's incremental change to become law." Elon stood up, his mind racing with possibilities. "What if we made transparency mandatory, but in a way that allows consumers to make the ultimate choice? Let's build a global platform where users can rate, review, and vote on transparency metrics in real time, across every industry. A kind of direct democracy for business practices. No more waiting for governments to regulate, no more slow-moving legislation. Let the people decide." The room was silent for a moment as everyone processed Elon's idea. It was ambitious, but it had the potential to undermine Bellamy's slow-moving model entirely. If people could vote on what information they wanted to be made public, companies would have no choice but to adapt, and fast. The pressure from consumers would be overwhelming. "This could work," Mark said, breaking the silence. "It shifts the power from governments and corporations to the consumers themselves. It's bold, but it might be the only way to sidestep Bellamy's approach." Elon smiled, his excitement evident. "Exactly. We'll give the people the power. Let them drive the change we need, and in doing so, we'll force the corporations to fall in line. If they don't, they'll be left behind." In the coming days, Elon and his team worked tirelessly to refine the concept. They began drafting plans for a new platform, an open-source global network where transparency metrics would be ranked and voted on by consumers. Companies that failed to meet the demands of transparency would be publicly rated, and the highest-rated companies would be the ones celebrated for their efforts. The platform would allow users to track supply chains, view real-time data on everything from the sourcing of ingredients in their food to the ethical practices of their favorite tech companies. Transparency wouldn't just be a buzzword, it would become the new norm, driven by the people who had the power to vote with their wallets. The announcement came just weeks later. Elon launched the platform to massive fanfare, calling it Open Transparency, a place where consumers could directly influence the way companies operated. It was bold, it was disruptive, and it was everything that Bellamy's regulated, slow-moving model wasn't. As expected, the response was immediate. The media picked up on the news, and soon, everyone was talking about Elon's latest initiative. The platform went live, and users were already flooding in, eager to see which companies were the most transparent and which were lagging behind. Bellamy, who had been watching this closely, knew that this was a game-changer. He had underestimated Elon's ability to stay ahead of the curve. But now, the stakes had been raised. The fight for the future of business transparency was reaching its final stages. Whoever could harness the power of the people would emerge victorious. The launch of Open Transparency had set the world on fire. Elon Musk had done it again, he had revolutionized an entire industry, but this time, it wasn't just through technology. It was through something far more powerful, the people. Consumers now had the means to control the transparency of the companies they supported, and the ramifications were being felt across every corner of the business world. The immediate success of the platform was staggering. Within days, millions of people had joined, rating companies, posting reviews, and demanding more openness than ever before. Some of the largest corporations had already scrambled to update their supply chains and operations to meet the new demands, fearing the public backlash of being caught out of compliance. Even Bellamy's own companies, once hesitant, were suddenly revising their transparency policies to stay competitive. Yet, while Elon celebrated the public victory, he knew this was only the beginning. There was still Bellamy to contend with. Back in Europe, Bellamy was furious. The launch of Open Transparency had completely undermined the carefully laid plans he had spent months crafting. His slow, regulatory approach, which he had positioned as the only responsible alternative to Elon's reckless radicalism, was now looking more and more like an outdated relic. But he wasn't ready to give up just yet. He had one card left to play, and it was his most dangerous move yet. Bellamy had spent the last few weeks quietly courting support from government officials in both Europe and the United States. His message was clear: while consumer-driven platforms like Elon's might have their appeal, true change could only come from regulation. He argued that transparency, if left unchecked, could become a weapon used to destroy entire industries, and without proper oversight, it could lead to chaos. He began pushing for stricter government regulations on consumer rating systems, calling for new rules that would require platforms like Open Transparency to be regulated by authorities to prevent misinformation or manipulation of ratings. It was a play to gain control over the very thing that had catapulted Elon's platform to success, the people. Elon had been watching Bellamy's moves closely, and as expected, Bellamy had once again attempted to shift the narrative. This time, however, it was a direct attack on the very core of the platform Elon had just created. Bellamy was trying to manipulate the government to intervene, to regulate transparency, and to control the power of consumers' votes. Rachel called him late one night, the urgency in her voice unmistakable. "Elon, we need to act fast. Bellamy is pushing for regulation on platforms like ours. If it passes, it could severely limit our ability to function. We'll be forced to comply with government oversight, and we'll lose the independence we've built." Elon sat in silence for a moment, thinking. So Bellamy's going to try to control the narrative again, huh? This time, we can't just wait for the storm to pass. We need to fight back. Rachel agreed. Exactly. The people need to understand that this isn't about chaos or misinformation. This is about empowering them to make informed decisions, not letting governments dictate the terms of transparency. Elon's thoughts raced. He had to come up with something bigger, something bold enough to counter Bellamy's push for control. If the government took hold of the narrative, they might be able to stop the tide of change that had started with his platform. The next day, Elon addressed the press. He was direct, resolute, and unflinching in his stance. The message was clear: the people would not be silenced, and the movement toward radical transparency was non-negotiable. We've already seen what happens when corporations and governments try to control the narrative, Elon began. Transparency should be a tool of the people, not a political weapon. What we've built is a platform for people to make their own informed decisions. We will not allow anyone, not even Bellamy, to take that power away from them. He continued, our platform isn't about chaos. It's about clarity. We're offering consumers a chance to shape the future, to demand ethical practices from the companies they support. No more waiting for slow-moving regulations. This is the future, and it's happening now. Elon's words were strong, but it wasn't just the content of his speech that resonated, it was the sheer determination in his voice. The media picked up on the speech, and once again, it went viral. People across the globe rallied behind the cause, posting on social media, signing petitions, and pushing their governments to reject any attempts to regulate the movement. Bellamy watched as the response to Elon's speech spread like wildfire. The backlash against his proposed regulations was more intense than he had anticipated. People were starting to see through his rhetoric, realizing that his caution was really an attempt to hold on to power. It was clear that if Bellamy wanted to win, he needed to pivot. He couldn't rely solely on the old methods anymore. His approach had become too predictable, too conservative. In a last-ditch effort to regain some control, Bellamy called for an emergency global summit, bringing together some of the most influential CEOs and world leaders to discuss how to regulate transparency in business. He pitched it as an opportunity to bring together all parties, governments, companies, and consumers, to find common ground. But the truth was, he was hoping to wrest control back from Elon's platform, to make the case that only through regulation could a truly sustainable future be built. Elon, of course, was not about to let Bellamy off the hook so easily. He immediately announced his own counter-summit, to be held the same week, but with a very different premise. While Bellamy would be talking about regulation, Elon would focus on how transparency could be the foundation of a truly free market, one where consumers, not governments or corporations, held the power to shape the future. The contrast between the two events was stark. At Bellamy's summit, the tone was cautious, political, and full of bureaucratic jargon. At Elon's summit, the energy was electric, full of young innovators, passionate consumers, and entrepreneurs all united by one cause, a world where transparency wasn't just a luxury, but a universal standard. As the two events drew nearer, tensions mounted. The world was watching. The battle lines were drawn, and the global conversation had shifted. Would governments and corporations be able to wrest control of transparency back from the people? Or would Elon's movement continue to build momentum, unrestrained by the weight of regulation? The world had never been so divided. On one side, Elon Musk's radical approach to transparency was gaining ground, bringing a flood of support from consumers, activists, and young innovators who believed that the people should control the future of business. On the other side, Bellamy's careful, calculated strategy was gaining traction among corporate giants, government officials, and politicians who argued that unchecked transparency would destabilize economies and industries. Both men were preparing for their respective summits, each determined to make their vision for the future of business a reality. And as the days ticked down, the global anticipation reached a fever pitch. The question on everyone's mind was simple: who would win? Elon's summit, dubbed the Global Transparency Revolution, was scheduled to take place at one of his private facilities in Texas. The event was being billed as a celebration of consumer-driven change, a chance for individuals to unite and showcase their power. Hundreds of tech entrepreneurs, activists, and thought leaders had already signed up to attend. The goal wasn't just to talk about transparency, it was to make it happen. The theme of the summit was Radical Transparency, the Future of Business, and the message was clear: businesses would either change or be left behind. It wasn't just a political movement, it was a cultural one. A new generation of consumers had spoken, and they were demanding more. They weren't willing to wait for slow-moving governments or self-interested corporations to act. They were ready to take control. On the other side of the world, Bellamy's summit was set to take place in Brussels, the heart of European politics. His event, titled the Global Corporate Responsibility Forum, was framed as a balanced discussion on how businesses could evolve in a way that was both ethical and sustainable. Bellamy's team had carefully curated a list of influential speakers, including high-ranking EU officials, CEOs of major corporations, and regulatory experts. Bellamy's approach was one of caution, positioning his vision as a responsible alternative to Elon's chaotic, consumer-driven model. Bellamy had already met with some of the most powerful corporations in the world, promising that under his model, they could achieve sustainability without the risks of radical change. His argument was simple: transparency was important, but it needed to be gradual, controlled, and aligned with international regulations to avoid economic upheaval. As both events neared, the tension was palpable. The media had picked up on the contrast between Elon's rebellious, bold stance and Bellamy's measured, traditional approach. Public opinion was split down the middle, with some seeing Elon's model as the future of a free market society, while others viewed Bellamy's approach as the necessary safeguard to prevent chaos. Elon, always one to push boundaries, was determined to make his summit a spectacle. He personally invited a range of guests from diverse industries, tech, entertainment, fashion, food, and even nonprofits, to speak at the event. The goal was to showcase the power of transparency across all sectors, from the smallest startups to the largest multinational corporations. "We're not here just to talk," Elon said during a brief interview before the summit. "We're here to build. We're here to give people the tools they need to hold companies accountable. And we're going to make sure that radical transparency isn't just a buzzword, but a movement." Meanwhile, Bellamy was preparing his speech for the Global Corporate Responsibility Forum. He knew that this would be his last chance to convince the world that his version of transparency was the responsible choice. He framed his argument around the idea of sustainability, not just for businesses, but for society as a whole. In his view, transparency needed to be integrated with ethical business practices, social responsibility, and long-term stability. "This isn't about restricting freedom," Bellamy said to his team as he rehearsed his speech. "It's about creating an environment where businesses can thrive without sacrificing ethics or stability. If we let things go unchecked, we risk destabilizing the entire system. We need to give consumers more information, but we also need to ensure that businesses can operate within a framework that doesn't cause harm." As the day of the summits arrived, the world was watching. Live streams were set up for both events, with millions of viewers expected to tune in. Social media platforms buzzed with anticipation, as people from all over the globe discussed which summit they would attend, or whether they'd watch both. Elon's event was a spectacle from the moment it began. The venue was packed with passionate individuals, all eager to hear from the speakers who would shape the future of transparency. The energy in the room was electric, with attendees on the edge of their seats, waiting for Elon to take the stage. And when he finally did, the applause was deafening. "Thank you all for being here today," Elon began, his voice steady and full of conviction. "Today, we begin the next chapter of business history. A chapter where the people have the power, where consumers decide what companies will rise and which ones will fall. This isn't about waiting for governments to act. This isn't about waiting for slow-moving regulations. This is about taking action now. The future of business is transparency, and it's in our hands." The crowd erupted into cheers. Elon continued, outlining his vision for a world where transparency wasn't just a tool for businesses, but a right for consumers. He introduced several entrepreneurs and thought leaders who spoke passionately about the need for a new kind of business environment, one where companies couldn't hide behind opaque systems and where the consumer voice was not just heard, but acted upon. Meanwhile, Bellamy's summit took a different tone. His speech was delivered with the poise of a seasoned politician, calm and measured. He spoke of the need for a balance between transparency and stability, and emphasized that without proper oversight, transparency could lead to unintended consequences. The crowd at his event, a collection of CEOs, diplomats, and industry leaders, listened intently as he laid out a vision for incremental change. "We cannot afford to throw caution to the wind," Bellamy said, his voice firm. "Transparency is important, but it must be controlled. A regulated approach will allow businesses to evolve responsibly, without putting global markets at risk. This is how we ensure that transparency leads to positive change, not chaos." Bellamy's words were met with polite applause, but the energy in the room felt restrained, controlled. There were no cheers, no spontaneous bursts of support. It was clear that while his message resonated with those in power, it lacked the fire and passion that Elon's summit had ignited. As the day wore on, it became clear that this wasn't just a battle of ideas, it was a battle for the soul of the future. Would transparency be something dictated by governments and corporations, or would it be driven by the people? The world was watching as both Elon's and Bellamy's summits concluded. The global divide was now more pronounced than ever. Each man had made his case, Elon with his call for radical consumer-driven transparency, and Bellamy with his plea for responsible regulation to ensure sustainability. Both had compelling arguments, but there was no denying the momentum Elon had built. The question remained, would this be enough to topple Bellamy's grasp on the corporate world? The aftermath of the summits was nothing short of a whirlwind. Headlines across the globe were dominated by the two men's speeches, with both sides claiming victory. But behind the scenes, the stakes had only just escalated. Bellamy's position, though still influential, was weakening. The corporate world, at least the portion that had been initially hesitant about Elon's platform, was beginning to shift. Investors, once staunch supporters of Bellamy's conservative approach, were starting to question whether their bet on gradual change would ultimately leave them behind in a world that was moving too fast. Bellamy had underestimated the power of the people. He had thought that with enough influence and control over the regulatory process, he could dictate the pace of change. But now, as consumer-driven movements gained ground, he was faced with an uncomfortable truth: it was no longer just about managing corporate interests. It was about managing a tidal wave of public opinion. In the weeks following the summits, public support for open transparency grew exponentially. Social media exploded with posts, articles, and videos from everyday consumers voicing their demands for greater accountability and openness from businesses. Hashtags like #RadicalTransparency and #PeoplePower trended globally. Elon, as always, used this to his advantage, consistently engaging with his growing audience. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Elon appeared in an interview with a popular journalist to discuss the next steps for his platform. "We've started a revolution," Elon said, leaning forward in his chair. "But this is just the beginning. The fight for transparency isn't over, and we have to be prepared for everything that comes next." He spoke of his vision for the future, a world where every consumer had the tools to make informed decisions, where no company could hide behind opaque practices. He promised to expand the platform, rolling out even more features that would give consumers the power to dig deeper into the business practices of the companies they supported. It was bold, it was ambitious, and it was working. Meanwhile, Bellamy was scrambling. He had seen the growing tide of public opinion, but he refused to accept defeat. His team worked tirelessly behind closed doors to lobby governments for support, trying to salvage his position. Bellamy's message had always been that businesses needed a responsible framework to grow within, and he wasn't going to abandon that position, even in the face of overwhelming public pressure. One of his last-ditch efforts was to propose a new bill in the European Union. The bill, titled the Corporate Transparency and Stability Act, sought to create a unified global standard for corporate transparency, but with a clear focus on regulation. Under his framework, businesses would be required to disclose key financial and operational data, but only under strict guidelines designed to prevent exploitation of the system. It would be a compromise, offering transparency but controlling the flow of information to ensure it didn't lead to market instability. The bill quickly gained traction among European lawmakers, particularly those who feared the volatility that radical transparency could create. Bellamy had rallied his corporate allies, including major players in the finance, energy, and tech sectors, to back his bill. They argued that consumer-driven movements like Elon's posed a direct threat to business stability and the global economy. Elon wasn't about to let Bellamy control the narrative. He saw the Corporate Transparency and Stability Act for what it was, a last-ditch attempt to regulate and control the very thing that had made his platform successful. Elon's team worked quickly to organize a global campaign against Bellamy's bill. He knew that if it passed, it would cripple the movement he had built. In a statement to the press, Elon didn't mince words: Bellamy's new bill isn't about transparency. It's about control. He's trying to regulate transparency to protect the interests of big corporations. But the truth is simple: the people deserve to know what's really going on behind the curtain. We can't allow this bill to pass. The battle had shifted from the corporate boardrooms and government offices to the streets. Activists, consumers, and everyday people began rallying against the bill. Mass protests erupted in major cities around the world, with people demanding that Bellamy's bill be scrapped. Social media campaigns exploded, and petitions calling for transparency gained millions of signatures. As the pressure mounted, Bellamy found himself on the defensive. He had underestimated the power of Elon's movement. What had started as a corporate battle had now become a global war for the future of business and consumer rights. Bellamy's attempts to sway lawmakers were met with fierce opposition, as many were now hesitant to support a bill that could alienate the public. The tipping point came when several key European governments, fearing the growing public backlash, publicly stated that they would not support Bellamy's bill. This was a devastating blow to his cause. Without the backing of major governments, Bellamy's last hope for control was slipping away. With the momentum clearly on his side, Elon moved to capitalize on the victory. In a bold move, he announced a new feature for open transparency: the ability for users to rate and review government actions and policies related to corporate transparency. This was a direct challenge to Bellamy's regulatory framework and a way to ensure that consumers, not governments, remained in control of the narrative. It was a direct shot at Bellamy's efforts to use regulation to tame the movement. Elon's new initiative sent shockwaves through the political and corporate worlds. Governments and corporations could no longer hide behind regulations; they had to answer directly to the people. The power of transparency had officially shifted from the boardrooms to the streets, and Elon Musk had solidified his position as the leader of a new era of business. Bellamy, facing mounting pressure and seeing his carefully constructed world unravel, made a decision. He would give one final speech, attempting to sway public opinion back in his favor. It was to be his last-ditch attempt to reclaim control, to convince the world that his vision of stability and regulation was the responsible choice. But in his heart, Bellamy knew that he was fighting a losing battle. The global debate over transparency had reached its boiling point. For months, the world had watched the ideological battle between Elon Musk and Bellamy unfold, with each man digging in his heels, determined to shape the future in his own vision. But as the political, corporate, and public spheres collided, it was becoming clear that only one could emerge victorious. Elon Musk had managed to galvanize an international movement, one that demanded radical change. His platform, Open Transparency, had gained millions of active users, and the support for consumer-driven transparency was undeniable. People wanted more than just information; they wanted to hold companies accountable, to make informed decisions, and to take control of their own destinies. Elon's message resonated deeply with the younger generation, with those who had grown up in the age of social media and instant communication. They were accustomed to transparency in their own lives, and now they demanded it from the world's largest corporations. Bellamy, on the other hand, had maintained his stronghold on corporate power. His proposal for the Corporate Transparency and Stability Act had garnered significant support from industry giants, governments, and regulatory bodies. Bellamy had argued that businesses needed a carefully crafted framework, one that could balance transparency with stability, and he was not about to back down. But as the movement for radical change gathered momentum, Bellamy was facing an insurmountable challenge. His carefully constructed world of regulation was slowly crumbling under the weight of public pressure. The day of the final showdown arrived. Both men had agreed to meet in a neutral location, a massive auditorium in Geneva, Switzerland, where a global audience would tune in to watch the last chapter of this battle. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, one that would determine the future of business and transparency. Elon arrived early, his usual unorthodox style in full display. He greeted the crowd with a calm but confident demeanor, already addressing the cameras. "This isn't just about business," Elon said, looking directly into the camera. "This is about the future of our world. It's about empowering people to make the decisions that affect their lives. If we want to make progress, we have to open the doors and let the light in. Transparency isn't just an option anymore. It's a necessity." As he spoke, the audience erupted in applause. The energy in the room was palpable. Elon had already captured the public's imagination, and his words were just the beginning of the final push for the change he envisioned. Bellamy arrived shortly after, his expression stern. He was a man accustomed to power and influence, but today, even he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was slipping away from him. As he walked onto the stage, the room fell into an expectant silence. He took a moment to adjust his suit, then faced the audience with the poise of a seasoned politician. "I respect the passion that Elon Musk has brought to the table," Bellamy began, his voice measured. "But passion alone cannot guide the future of business. We live in a complex world, one where radical change often comes with unintended consequences. My proposal for the Corporate Transparency and Stability Act is about ensuring that transparency doesn't destabilize our global economy. It's about finding a balanced approach, where businesses can thrive, consumers can be informed, and we don't put the fragile systems we've built in jeopardy." The audience listened intently, but there was no immediate response. Bellamy's words were calm, controlled, and rational, traits that had served him well in the past. However, the tension in the room suggested that those present were no longer as swayed by his carefully constructed rhetoric. The world had changed, and Bellamy's cautious approach seemed out of sync with the growing momentum for a new era. The debate began in earnest. Elon and Bellamy took turns presenting their positions, answering questions from a panel of global leaders, journalists, and economic experts. Elon emphasized the need for openness, advocating for a world where consumers could access real-time information about the companies they supported. He spoke of empowering individuals, dismantling corporate secrecy, and breaking down barriers to information. Bellamy, in contrast, spoke of responsibility. He argued that transparency, while important, could lead to chaos if implemented too quickly. He warned that radical transparency could cause businesses to buckle under pressure, creating economic instability and uncertainty. His solution, the Corporate Transparency and Stability Act, offered a slower, more controlled path, one that allowed businesses to disclose key information without risking global financial turmoil. The debate reached its climax when a prominent journalist, known for his tough questions, stood up. "Gentlemen," he began, "we've heard your arguments. But what about the people? The average consumer? We've seen movements all over the world calling for change. They want transparency. They want accountability. What would you say to the millions of people who feel like they're being left behind by the corporate world?" The room fell silent. It was a simple but powerful question. Elon took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. "The people are tired of being kept in the dark," he said, his voice steady but filled with passion. They're tired of being told what they can and can't know. They're tired of the lies, the half-truths, the manipulation. Transparency isn't just a buzzword, it's the key to unlocking a better future. We can't wait for governments or corporations to act. We, the people, need to take control now. The crowd erupted in applause. Elon's words struck a chord with the audience, and for a moment, it seemed as though the battle was already won. Bellamy, visibly shaken but determined, stood up and faced the crowd. "I understand the passion for change," he said, his voice quieter than before. "But we have to ask ourselves, is change worth the risk? We can't ignore the consequences of unchecked actions. Stability is just as important as progress. If we tear everything down without a plan, we could destroy everything we've worked for." There was a pause. Bellamy's message was rational, responsible even. But it lacked the urgency, the sense of hope, that Elon's words carried. And as the crowd's energy shifted in Elon's favor, Bellamy realized that the battle for the future of transparency had been lost. The debate ended, but the decision had already been made. The world had spoken, and Elon Musk's vision for radical transparency had won the day. Bellamy, while still a powerful figure in the corporate world, found his influence waning. His bill was dead in the water, and the corporations that had once backed him began to pivot toward Elon's platform, realizing that the winds of change could no longer be ignored. For Elon, it was a victory, not just for himself, but for the millions of people who had fought for a world of openness and accountability. But he knew that this was just the beginning. The real work had yet to come. There would be challenges ahead, opposition from powerful figures, corporate resistance, and the constant pushback from those who feared the disruption. But Elon was undeterred. He had started a revolution, and there was no turning back. As the dust settled, one thing was clear: transparency had won. The battle was over, but the war for a new era of business had only just begun. Elon Musk had proved that, in the end, it wasn't just about power, it was about people. And in a world driven by information, the people had finally taken control. Elon Musk's vision for radical transparency has prevailed. But what does the future hold? Will his movement truly change the way we do business, or will the challenges of implementation prove too great? How do you see the future of corporate transparency? Let us know your thoughts, and stay tuned for more developments as the world of business continues to evolve.